Hi, class. As we begin Module 5, we're really getting into core content as you start thinking about gender. So, we're into the 5th week, and we're looking at socialization. Socialization is a fundamental concept for sociology. It defines how we become members of groups. It puts us in that process. So, socialization reaches well beyond gender. We can see it in families. We can see how we fit in that process. Socialization is the way we learn to become a member of any group, and it's a constant process. Keeps changing us, and we keep changing the groups we're part of, and we do change our gender identity and roles as time goes on. Gender socialization is a process through which we learn what the gender norms of our society or whatever society we're studying is, and how they are developed internally, and how they form our identity. Gender norms are the set of rules for which it is appropriate for men to behave in one way and women to behave in another in particular cultures, and how that matches from one culture to another. We look at it and how it's different based on the societies we're part of. Gender identity is the way in which being masculine or feminine becomes that internalized part of the way we think ourselves as a woman, as a man, as a that process. In fact, it's interesting when we look at this. When did you first know that you were different than the other gender or biological sex difference? When did you form that realization? For many people, when they're interviewed, and when I teach sociology of childhood, we talk about this, the research shows that people don't even get a gender identity, that they know the difference between men and female until 5 or 6 in many cases. Now, part of that's influenced by society. No surprise to you. But we're going to examine this in a multiple level of ways. So let me get started on the PowerPoint and hit on the major points as we go through as you examine this chapter. There's a lot of information here and a lot of detailed information. So we're only going to hit the high points as normal through the process, but let's look at those PowerPoints. So first, let's start thinking, when did you become aware of your gender? And when did you learn what was gender appropriate? For someone like me who was considered a tomboy and faced that particular climbing trees, whatever, my favorite toy was my Tonka road scraper. It wasn't a doll. It wasn't that I fit those gendered expectations, and I did not see those as different or wrong. Though my sister, 3 years older, was very much into dolls. She tells me that as a child under the age of 1, I tore up all her dolls and ruined them. And maybe that's why I didn't have the attachment to them. But the expectations were very open. My mother had been paralyzed by polio when I was very young, 6 months old. My father thought he was never going to have a son. He taught my sister and I to do the same things he would have taught a son. So I worked in the workshop with him. I had those expectations put into place, and yet I wore the dresses. Back in the time that you were socialized much more by clothing as a female than you are today. So when did you feel those expectations? And through socialization, we learn to be members of our society. It's kind of neat how powerful that family is, and we get socialized by them, but we also are socialized through the media, through other organizations like churches. We can learn our gender through so many processes, and socialization is definitely a lifelong process. Think about the different stages in your life. As a college student, what is the socialization you've been shown? And even your identity, your gender identity can change during that time period as you start to understand that there are choices that you can make that are not so forced. So, gender socialization. Were there rules of appropriate behavior? Were they different for you than the opposite sex sibling? Did you see those rules being different throughout life? Did there such dating rules that were different between the male children in your family and the female children in your family? So many families today, basically, as we start looking at them, may only have one child or two children, and they may be the same gender, and you may not have noticed those differences. Or was it that girls weren't allowed to date till they were 15 or 16, and boys were allowed to date at younger ages, and there were more liberal rules? Analyze these in your own background. Now, I want you to always step outside using that sociological imagination as you start to look at that. Look at the people around you. Was gender socialization different for them than it was in your family, or were there cultural influences that came through? Gender socialization is an individual approach to gender as we move forward. So interesting. Now, sex is assigned at birth, usually. We can tell whether a baby is male or female, right? Well, you're going to find out in this chapter that's not always the case. But sex is usually determined by the presence or absence of a penis. And a penis is considered right, if it's 2.5 centimeters. And if it's smaller, it's a coitus, and it measures shorter than 1 centimeter. This is how we determine sex, by looking at it. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular topic as we move on to talk about intersex children. I think that the video in your module will give you a great piece to add to your readings here. So you're going to find, sorry, I stopped that a little early. I searched very hard to find this particular video. It's called Me, My Sex, and I, Disorders of Sexual Development. And I've given you the link to it. This is the research that had been done in the UK, and it covers more than the book even covers, but gives you that interactions and starts thinking about the intersexed. That 1 out of 50 children is faced with issues that consider them to be an intersexed individual. And we don't acknowledge that. We don't even address it. So, important things for you to think about. And as I said, I'm not going to focus on that part of the PowerPoint, but especially I think you will find this video extremely interesting, and it is well done and research based. So what have we learned by looking at intersex people? That intersex is not an unnatural. It occurs frequently enough to challenge this idea of sexual dysmorphism as natural. And the way we've attacked this is socially driven. That this has been this idea that we can easily determine what's a penis and what's a coitus, as far as determining sexuality in the process. And we've let medical people make this choice of what sex and perform surgeries. So it's important that we need to look at this and understand that there's multiple sexes out there. Now, some of the research kind of indicates that there are 5 sex categories: male, a male hermaphrodite, multiple sex, a true hermaphrodite, okay, a female hermaphrodite, and a female. And they suggest that we have the right to choose. Again, your video goes into this in great detail and why it's important to consider this as a different way of addressing our sexuality and who we are, that gender within it. So let's look at socialization. Throughout sociology, we look at how we're socialized. When we look at crime, why do people become criminals? Is it the influence of peers? Are they born that way? Is it biological? Are they socialized by the fact that they grow up in poverty and life would be better? Are they socialized because their parents were career criminals? We see all of those things come into place. So let's look at it within gender. Gender becomes an internalizing us through our actions with those around us. So my favorite toy, being a Tonka road scraper, was probably belittled by other people. My parents thought it was fine, but it was toys. At my 5th birthday were dolls, not trucks. You become socialized, and in that process by multiple groups. The person being socialized is that target of socialization. And the people in the groups and institutions who are doing the socialization are the agents of social change. Now, gender has been a big part of psychology. And early on, as we start looking at what Freud says, we can see that gender is specific as we explore. Freud looked at the id, the ego, and the superego, and he felt that as he looked at males and females, that females were inferior and they had the penis envy as well as they weren't fully developed. Now, we've gone on beyond that, haven't we, as we look at social learning theories. These were developed in psychology from behaviorism, and they claim that human behavior is learned through rewards and punishments, that there are significant things that come into place that create us and make us who we are. So children are rewarded for appropriate behavior. Girls may be punished for playing in the dirt, getting dirty in that form, and boys may be punished for crying or having a fit about not touching worms. You can see the differences that come into place. There's learning that occurs in this process, and latent learning can occur by the intimidation of others or people making fun of them. How often in the classroom did you divide out into that girl and boy routine? Or if you hung with the boys, as a girl, were you belittled, or vice versa, the boys that hung around with the girls? And so we see this conscious and latent process going on in socialization. So there's this you need to behave like without crossing your legs and walk like a girl, or you need to go on, and yet there's this latent that occurs by the learning of others around us and their view of what we should be. Now, cognitive development theory, again, a psychological theory, and educational theories, was Piaget's emphasis on children's active role in their own socialization. It's interesting as we see socialization and how they occur. We'll see the differences that occur between men and women. There's things in our brains that are different, but there's this cognitive development. Gender issues look at how we fit into that process. So sorry about that. Piaget's emphasis that children are active roles in their own socialization. So here's a picture of Jean Piaget. He was a Swiss clinical psychologist known for his pioneering work in child development. He's writing in all the way up until his death in 1980, as he looks at the theory that comes into place. And give me a sec, I'm going to pop you over to look. So Piaget looks at children as a whole, and he thinks children think differently than adults as he looks at the process. And when you know that, he's very right there. And he looks at these theories that come into place and steps that are consequences of child development. The sensor-motor stage, the preoccupational stage, the concrete stage, and the formal operational stage. And in each of these, he sees gender developing through that process and through the behaviors. Um, and remember, I asked you, when did you first start seeing gender? You can see how it becomes part of that concrete operational stages that you gain a better understanding of mental operations and think logically, and you can start seeing the differences that come into place. Now, Kohlberg used Piaget's model to develop the cognitive development theories. Now, these are psychological theories, but they're tied to social psych. And remember, social psych is that crossover spot between sociology and psychology that looks at these particular issues. He focused on the internalization of self as male or female. And this really ties into some of the theories that come into place as we see ourselves through symbolic interactionist theories such as the looking glass self, that we start to identify and gender type through these stages, and it focuses on those active socializations. So gender is, we start to acquire this gender identity, and then by the age of 5, this permanent stability, and then by 7, we start seeing if there's incongruency in it. Now, other theories out there include Beam, and he looks at gender schema, and your book talks about that at a much greater level. And I'll let you explore that because I'm really taking too long with your video this week. So as we look at these, we see some significant issues that come into place. But primary socialization into gender begins before the baby's born. Think about a baby shower. We want to know the gender of the baby ahead of time, male, female. We even start saying colors and what fits and who fits in that group, and even how we socialize. And then the primary groups are charged with this socialization of the family, and babies born into society with certain assumptions of what the gender is going to make them be and who they are going to be in that process. So we see this socialization go into place, and in many societies it's very structured. It depends on that historical and cultural background as well, how deeply we are socialized into particular gender practices. Now, gender in China is reviewed by your textbook here, and we talk about this because it's important to know that in some society, a male is a preferred child. In China, there are multiple reasons for that. Males are responsible for their aging parents. They are the person who is to be there to support those parents as well as give care. And so when we were forced to the one-child policy, the elimination of female children was done on a regular basis. They were abandoned and they were killed. They were given up for adoption because they could only have that one child, and it was preferable for it to be a man. In other societies, women are preferable, but that is unusual. And so each society comes into place, and gender then becomes a very powerful issue. Also, we'll see the gender difference. Women in many cultures are not considered for education, and we can see that that can occur. Women were not educated in China in the past, and when the communist rule came into place in the 40s, they tried to improve the status of women by educating them on a regular basis. There is an importance in our gendered socialization through our peer groups, as mentioned before, and we have very gendered play. I'm going to include a video for you to watch as well. I am moving forward with videos that you're going to view in the class, and they will look at socialization. There are 2 TED Talks that you're going to observe. I was going to put in a piece by Deborah Tannen, but you'll get that later, on the differences of language and gender as well, which is important because they're part of the socialization process. So to wrap this all up, our chapter talks about aging and gender and the difference that comes into respect here, that ageism affects both men and women differently on those gendered basis and that gendered socialization. There's so much that we could spend on this. I'll leave you with what the chapter gives you, but to let you know that both men and women in aging take on the role of caregiving, and that 2/3 of the people caring for Alzheimer's patients are women, that we can see that we're locked into the socialization that women should care for the population. What's interesting is if we look at spousal caregiving, it's much more equal. But if we look at children giving care to their parents, it is the females that give that care. So let's sum up this at the end as we finish with what longer video than I would have liked to have made you. Gender socialization is a lifelong process, and it varies by our culture. It varies by our background. It varies by all sorts of things that come into place. And agents of socialization include family, government, institutions, work environments, all of those, medical, all of those institutions. You have that excellent video to watch on intersex people that are not indoctrinated to the gender system and where do they fit today, and children that are so motivated to acquiring gender. So to finish up this module, you're going to do a number of things. And let me bring you back to the module here. You'll see that I've added some videos for you. As I said, earlier on, the video on me, my sex, and I, disorders of sexual development, does an excellent job, current research, and I think it's even more valuable to you than the text information in many ways, because you hear from intersex individuals in their own words and what they experienced and how you fit. I've asked you to explore common sense here, as you can link into some information on gender, and then 2 short TED Talks. The first one, What My Kindergartners Taught Me About Gender, which is 12 minutes, and Pink and Blue, Communication Gendered to Our Children, which, by the way, is only 6 minutes long. So they'll go very quickly for you, but it ties into that strong piece of socialization. Your discussion board is here, and ask you to state how you would define what is successful socialization, and what criteria would you use, and how might gender socialization change in the future, and how has it already changed? Pretty significant as you watch those TED Talk videos. Now let me back this up, and let's look at what questions are available. For this particular chapter, the questions available, those gender exercises, you can choose to answer for your weekly assignment. And remember, you only have to complete 10 of them. You'll have more than 10 available to you, but you can pick from the end of chapter 4, question 2, 4, 5, or 6. Pick only one and answer only one. Do not answer all of them into one paper. One is all you need as you explore this topic. Thank you and have a great day.